Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to our 22nd edition of the Privacy Collective. My name is Doug Kruger. I'm Vice President of Strategic Accounts here at RadarFirst, and I'm thrilled to be back here hosting once again. For those of you who are new and joining us for the first time, the Privacy Collective is a monthly series bringing together the best minds in privacy to discuss industry trends, issues, challenges, etc. For today's session, we're going to be discussing effective incident management documentation. And I'm thrilled to say that we have a very special guest with us, Jodi Daniels, Clover Advisors founder, CEO, and consultant. So Jodi, thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing this. You've always been a very strong supporter of us at RadarFirst. We're thrilled to have you here. And I thought I'd just start by letting you give a brief introduction, tell us a little bit about your background in the privacy space, a little bit about Clover Advisors, your primary responsibilities, and don't forget to plug your new book.
Well, hi, thank you, Doug. So glad to be here and welcome everyone. So as Doug shared, I'm Jodi Daniels and I run a boutique data privacy consulting firm called Clover Advisors. Think of us as the fractional privacy team or where you need a little bit of extra assistance. Most privacy organizations have a very long list of to-dos, and we help smaller and mid-sized organizations with those when they don't really have anyone paying attention to privacy. We fill that role, and where there are some folks and you need some extra hands, we're able to help in as well. And it is very exciting in October, just in time for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. There is a new book. It's called Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time. So we're really excited. It's meant to be for the business executives who need to understand why privacy and security are so important to the organization.
And it's just in time for the holiday season.
Of course, everyone needs a privacy and security book for the holidays. But it is actually, we timed it very specifically to be part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And another way to not only educate employees how to protect data so that they don't have so many incidents we're going to talk about today, but also to help educate those executives why privacy and security resources and tools are critical to have.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm sure everybody's going to go out and buy it as soon as it's released in October. And I'm thrilled again that you're here today. So, today's conversation is really around the importance of documentation throughout what we'll call the privacy incident response process. And I wanted to start by framing the process itself as it relates to the different stages in incident response. So we're going to put up a quick slide here that sort of shows what those stages are. We'll talk through it, and then we'll try and get an idea of, where the challenges are, where the sticky points are, and things like that. So, as we look at the privacy incident response process, we look at it as sort of in this flow, recognizing, of course, it's not all linear. It's not all happening the same way, but it all starts, of course, with a discovery. Oh my gosh, there's been some sort of a disclosure, some sort of a privacy incident. And then there's the triage and the investigation, maybe understanding the regulatory effects that might be involved, recognizing what the role is of the person that saw the data versus the person that owns the data. Are they the data owner, the control of the processor, things like that. We also recognize that not all incidents start as privacy incidents, right? They could start as a security incident, as an IT incident, maybe as a records management incident. And then, of course, there's doing that risk assessment, sort of understanding, quantifying the level of risk based on the data sensitivity and the risk factors and sort of the jurisdictional risk of harm. And then just the entire remediation process and looking at root cause and corrective actions and trending, where are the incidents occurring? Can we see things based on line of business or location, or maybe it's a third party that's involved with breaching the data, and being able to sort of run reports and benchmarking and things like that. So, as we look at this entire process, I guess the first question that I want to ask you is, how would you describe what is incident documentation? Why is it such a critical part of the overall privacy incident management lifecycle?
Well, I love the slide that you just shared. It's, I think, very helpful to visualize and understand the different steps. And if you think about each of those different steps, well, one, there's probably lots of different people involved. Determining what kind of incident is important. Is it a security incident, a privacy incident, a a non-incident, right? Some people think it's an incident and actually it's not. So having to be able to go through and truly be able to say, here's what we've done, here's what it is, and be able to have that living proof, as well as the who's going to do something and what we found. There could be risks, there could be flaws, there could be areas that need to change. And I know we're going to talk about sort of the how that gets documented, because there's also some really important details there. But much like everything else, otherwise, with no documentation, you have a massive he said, she said game. And that typically doesn't go well. And the operator, at the end gets a completely different story. When you have a solid method to be able to capture the information, everyone is clear on what is happening, and there's one consistent theme and message and story.
And so when you look at that entire life cycle and recognizing it could touch a lot of different stakeholders, are there areas where documentation becomes more important, more critical, whether it's from an auditing or a regulatory perspective, or are there sort of friction points where it's difficult to get it? And I'm wondering if you see any of those stages as more important, maybe the early stages of the incident when you're sort of documenting what happened, or is the documentation really critical throughout the entire life cycle?
Well, so documentation is critical throughout the whole life cycle, with the exception it matters who is doing the documentation and who receives the documentation for purposes of privilege. So oftentimes, and of course I always have to have the it depends disclaimer that comes, but typically when you hire outside counsel, and the outside counsel is the one who is then hiring a forensic firm to produce the documentation, we want to be mindful of who gets that final report, compared to if it's an internal organization or an internal person that then goes and hires the firm. Your privilege might change, and that could be very important. When it's in the very early days, if you document everything that's happened, well, now you have a complete documentation trail. And instead, it might be better to have consistent touch points. I often see in these situations a morning check-in and an afternoon check-in. Here's what we learned, here's what we found. And then through that, you're able to glean, okay, here's what we're actually going to document. So documenting every single word can actually backfire. And instead, you need to identify what are the right words, the right way, with the right people to document. And I appreciate someone listening is, well, how do I know which one's right? That is why you need to really have a plan in place with your inside team and your outside team.
That is such an interesting point, because quite often I hear people saying, I'm a little reticent to document certain things for fear of discovery or litigation and things like that. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're talking about, is how much do you want to document, where in the process? And then, of course, I assume, there's going to be a need to revisit documentation. And one of the challenges that I've seen with a lot of organizations is it's not always centralized, and it's difficult to find. And in your consulting organization, you must see that, where you go into organizations and they've got documentation all over the place, where they're trying to pull things together for regulators or auditors. It could be quite a challenge.
Oh, absolutely. I think documentation on just about everything is a challenge, whether you're a tiny organization or a large organization. Overall, people are so good at, we're great communicators to capture what we communicate and into a written form in a manner that someone else can have is a challenge. And so it's important to have that cross-functional team. Again, that's why that plan is so critical. So you identify who are the people who are going to be part of this process, and what are we going to document, and where? Where should it live? What format will it be in? And who should have access? Hint, don't put this as a shared folder that everyone has access to. And if you think, well, of course, we would never do that. No, actually, it happens. So don't do that. Right? Really be mindful of where will this information be, and who's the owner, and who are the editors. And again, to me, it all goes back to that planning and process piece, and having the right internal owners be able to move that forward, and include the internal and the external, because you could have an outside IT firm, an outside forensic firm, an outside counsel. Maybe you needed to hire a report. Who prepares that documentation and sends it to whom? That's also really important. And where it even would get saved or stored.
When you brought up an important point, so we're talking about team collaboration, recognizing that the importance of collecting documentation, sharing documentation can touch a lot of different stakeholders. So, you know, as you look at the life cycle of an overall privacy incident per se, or an incident that has a privacy dimension, as we might call it, you know, what are the different roles that team members might have within that process?
Well, you'd have some who are going to be kind of the sleuthers, the investigators, the people actually looking in systems or looking in code and trying to understand what actually happened. You're going to have your legal team who's going to be part of assessing and strategizing what needs to be disclosed, who needs to be involved, what other type of forensics need to happen. The folks from kind of, I'm going to just generalize with IT, maybe something needs to be patched, or was there a patch and it didn't happen? Was it a third party vendor? Well, what does the contract have to say? Was this with our customers? Well, and of course, throughout this whole process, we need our communications team for both internal and external, because sometimes we might need to tell internal people just a little bit, and then eventually it's going to find our way potentially in some situations externally. Who's going to do the speaking? What is the consistent message? What is the cadence of what we're going to do? And if you follow that all the way to data breach, well, maybe you've hired additional firms who are going to be able to handle what that messaging looks like. So the communications people need to be a part. And sometimes you even need the customer support team to be able to be a part of it, to answer any inbound questions that customers are getting. It really depends a little bit on the breach or the incident, right? If something just poof stops working, or if you have invoices that have gone out to people, well, who got in our system and what happened? Did that even happen? How do I communicate to customers? We're investigating, that was real, that wasn't real. It all is interconnected. And
Sure.
so again, having that team in place and having clearly defined roles will be really important.
Well, thanks. And you know, what I wanted to do now is we tend to get a lot of people attending these sessions, and I like to make it a little bit more interactive. So what we're going to do is we're going to put up a poll around this concept of how organizations are currently documenting privacy incidents. So hopefully everybody can see the first poll that just came up, and I'll read it to you in case you have any trouble reading it, because some of the writing is a little hard to make out. So how does your organization document privacy incidents? And just select one of the following. Is it internally with an Excel spreadsheet or equivalent? Is it through a third-party software solution? Or is, I'm not sure, I'll likely go investigate after this session. So look forward to everybody's response on that. We'll give everybody about 10 seconds. I'll give Jodi and I a chance to have a sip of water.
That's a good idea.